excellent. So data validation and correction, and I promise to make this very exciting. So first and foremost, we want to make this very informative because, again, the title is somewhat elusive. So we're asked to make decisions off of data every single day, both campaign decisions, marketing decisions, business decisions, but the question is, how accurate is that data? And how do we validate that data or validate our results using data? And then finally, how do we course correct, right? How do we correct the actual results of our campaign or our findings using the data? Broad scope. So I want to narrow this down a little bit. So for the purposes of this panel, we're going to discuss 3 topics. Specifically, first, media delivery data, right? We deliver media, we want to make sure that we deliver it in a most accurate and concise way. So what is the story there? Audience data, how do we know we're reaching the right audience and how do we validate that? And then finally, what we would call direct path data. So going beyond just desktop and mobile, I know those are very keen and growing devices, but what about television and the addressability of the big screen, right? So there's data that's available there, and how accurate is that data? So when we talk about validation, there are tools. How do we validate that? Tools that deliver some of these results. Third-party data, we heard a lot about third-party data. How accurate is it? And we have some points of views on that. And then finally, ad standards, right? So the viewability standard, kind of a joke, right? 50% of the pixels viewed for 1 second. I don't know if I would count that as viewability or as a viewability standard, so we're going to discuss that. And then finally, we're going to correct for viewability, right? As marketers, the most important thing is my message being delivered to my consumer? Because if it's not, what's the point of marketing? Fraud and safety, how do we control for that? And then finally, targeting. So to discuss all of these topics, I'm going to welcome our esteemed panel, starting with George Ivie, who is the CEO of the MRC. Jane Clarke, CEO and Managing Director of CIMM. Jackson Bazley, Executive Director, Ernst & Young. And last but not least, Scott Knoll, CEO of Integral Ad Science. Welcome, guys. So Scott, since we're talking about viewability, right, and we know that that's extremely important, and we've been discussing the inability to inform the way we deliver ads. Do you think that now with the statistics, and is trying to change the slides, with the statistics that we're seeing today with respect to viewability, only 50% of the ads being viewable, sorry about that, and with fraud being on the rise, should advertisers inherently implement and deploy verification across every single campaign to protect their investment? What are your thoughts?
Well, if you want your advertising to work, I think it'd be helpful for it to be seen, and I think the realization in the industry that a lot of ads aren't being seen came as a shock to people. But for the longest time, we've been giving credit with the assumption that all ads are seen, and the reality is that when you buy media, it's a very important component of it that in order to be in the viewing window for a certain period of time, I mean, it has to have that in order to have some sort of effect at all. So absolutely, we need to pay attention to this. And in my mind, it's like it starts with viewability. That's a starting point, not an ending point. It's nothing we're going to fix. It's something that we're going to set up so we can now know what ads are in view. And then from there, there's a lot of more data that we need to look at, which is ultimately what percentage of the screen is it in view, how long, what else is in view at the same time, something we call share of view. So what other potential distractions from that exposure are in view. So it's exciting because for the first time in this industry, we're uncovering lots of new data, but just be prepared to think about this as a starting point again, not an ending point.
And I know that there are a lot of resources and costs associated with verifying every single campaign across viewability, fraud, brand safety, and we know the statistics are there. George, what are your thoughts? Should advertisers be deploying this sort of verification, but there are resources and costs associated with it?
Well, first of all, I think the discussion here can be pretty far-reaching because there are a lot of different types of verification. So if you're purely talking about verifying whether an ad was viewable or not, I really think that advertisers should be using viewability decisioning all the time because non-viewable inventory, I mean, I speak to a lot of marketers and trying to convince a marketer to pay for ads that aren't viewable, I'm not even trying that. That's just crazy. They don't want to do that, and I think they're right about that. But in terms of verification, there are other services. I mean, there's also invalid traffic and fraud, and there's ad placement and ad context and piracy and all different kinds of things that people want to protect their campaigns from. And I really think one of the most important messages to the audience is that those things are variable. They vary based on the environment that you're operating in. There are, you know, if you took a look at the top 100 websites, the vast majority of those websites, let's say 90% or more of those websites, probably have less than 5% invalid traffic because they're well stewarded, most of them are audited. And so you ask yourself, because the invalid traffic problem, maybe that's a 20%, 25% problem, where is all that invalid traffic? Well, it's outside of those environments in other environments. So if you're a marketer and you're going to place your ad in those more dangerous environments, I'll call it that, then yeah, you should definitely invest in verification of all those service lines. But if you're just working with, you know, a couple of websites, you know, CNN and ESPN or something, I'm just naming them, you have much less risk. I'm not saying you have no risk, but you have much less risk than what's touted today in you know, the media, let's say. We're painting everything with the same brush, and I don't think that's true. But that's a view.
So now that we've agreed that viewability is important, extremely important, because obviously an impression that's never been seen or an ad that's never been seen can't obviously influence a consumer to do anything, right? So verification is important with respect to viewability. Verification is important with respect to fraud. So let's say we fix that problem. What about audience, right? So the statistics, again, around audience targeting and audience definition are also stark, right? We're saying that only 44% of the time we're actually reaching the audience that we intended to reach. So how valid is third-party data? Now that I'm delivering the ad's being seen, it's not a bot, it's a human that's seeing it. Who is the human? So Jane, can you maybe discuss kind of the role of third-party data and how much confidence do we have in this third-party data with respect to targeting?
Yes, I'd be glad to. And CIMM has taken this on as an initiative. We've just completed a white paper looking at how to assess the quality and the kind of questions that you need to raise with the third-party data providers. CIMM is the end users of media measurement, so the advertisers, the agencies, and the media companies. And you know, we're clearly seeing, this just refers to demographic targeting, I believe, but it also gets a lot more complex when you start talking about particularly propensity targeting, lookalike targeting, where you're trying to model prospects and locate prospects, where you're moving beyond kind of known first-party data, where you can validate some of the third-party data. So I think what we're hearing is that the end users have a lot of questions. They want more transparency, they want more disclosure. They really don't understand behind some of the black boxes and some of the secret sauce, maybe I should say, of some of the third-party data providers, because it comes from a very different world. It comes from the direct marketing world. All these data matching facilities have grown up in a different environment than the media environment that many of them are used to, the media buying environment, where you have syndicated third-party data sources and everybody can see the same data. So in the direct marketing industry, they don't have that. And there's never been any auditing or accrediting or verification. It's a test and learn environment. It's a kind of buyer beware. You buy it, you test it. If it works, you use it again. If it doesn't work, you don't use it again. So there are a lot of issues as we get into relying on these kinds of data sets for media targeting. And particularly, I will say that the data providers are saying that all of a sudden, as we're moving into television, using this to match against set-top box data, that they're getting a lot more questions than they even got in digital from the end users, because the television world in particular has been very used to, syndicated data sources that everyone can share.
So it's a troubling insight, right? So if 50% of the ads are not seen, and if 44% of the time, mutually exclusive, we're not actually even reaching the audience that we're reaching, marketers should be concerned, right? So there needs to be some sort of standards, there needs to be process and procedures in place in order for a marketer to actually invest in the right way and actually deliver their message to the target audience, right? Because today, it seems like it's kind of the Wild West. So how would a marketer enrich a profile? Like, how would they get to this, right? So we're saying, I want a verified consumer. I want to know what they're doing from a behavioral standpoint. I want to know who they are from a demographic standpoint. And I want to know why they're engaging with my brand and not somebody else's brand, or vice versa, right? How do we answer these three critical questions? What's a good selection process for third-party data? What's a good selection process for verification? It's a big question, but what are the first steps?
You want me to go with that one?
Might as well.
Well, I will say that there's a whole ecosystem developing around these third-party data sources. So you have the end users, obviously, and then you have the data providers over here. And there are actually a bunch of companies growing up in between. Some of them are through your agencies, some are through sort of new kinds of agencies, even like Andy and Merkle and companies like that. So it's really a process of asking a whole list of questions, and you have to get used to this, and everyone has to develop their own list of questions. We talked to some marketers who've developed an entire process. Every time they deal with a new third-party data provider that they want to bring into their DMP or work with their agency recommends, they have a whole list of 20 questions. They ask all of them. Where's your data from? What's the source? How often do you update it? How much of your data is modeled? How do you do the modeling? What are you modeling it off of? They go through that entire list for every new data provider, and then they set up tests where they hold out certain parts of the test, and then they can have something to compare against, so that they're not just taking in data without the ability to read it and compare it against something else. So it really becomes a whole education and testing process that marketers and agencies and even the media companies who are also building out their own DMPs are now starting to go through.
No, really interesting. Here's another perspective. So Jackson, you're an independent third-party auditor. So here's a question, and George, you guys accredit the various partners and third-party data providers and viewability partners. So here's a question, right? How do we sequence the stuff? So let's say we leverage a partner like ComScore, who is MRC accredited, to plan a campaign. We launch the campaign, and then we validate that audience using another provider, also MRC accredited. But the combination of both may not be, right? So if one provider, MRC accredited, tells you, I am a female, and then on the validation, it tells you, I am a male, who's right? So is there a sequence, a process in place for us to actually recommend how you should actually structure a campaign and how you should sequence the partners so you're getting accurate results?
I don't know that I have the magic answer when it comes to the sequence. I do think that one of the underlying questions in terms of which data to use and what order to use it in is ultimately, what are you trying to accomplish in the first place? Yeah. Right? We heard a lot today. Data is not necessarily information. Information is not necessarily insight. Measurable is not necessarily meaningful. Cookies aren't necessarily people, and so on and so forth. But we transact on impressions or viewable impressions, but we want lift, or we want purchase, or we want to reach a particular target, whether it's demographic or otherwise defined. And in other cases, we want data that's fast so we can optimize mid-campaign if it looks like the campaign's going off the rails. And in another case, we want really strong data at the end so we can do fantastic post-buy analysis and really try to understand the effectiveness of the campaign. The challenge with all of that in some of the things that we see is that the definitions are not crisp at the very beginning. And if you don't have crisp definitions at the beginning, it's very hard to figure out exactly which sources to use where in the chain of the campaign.
Yeah, so it's almost as important to figure out what your objectives are and align the data sources and the sequencing of that data to be able to actually address that question.
I was wondering, I think the MRC has been participating in a project in the US called 3MS, Making Measurement Make Sense. And there's an overall vision to that project, which we've kind of bought into as an organization philosophically. The first phase of this, setting viewable impressions, which is a minimum opportunity to see standard, and then also creating an audience-based currency, is meant to create a counting standard that is, a valid impression that's viewable, that's set, filtered from invalid traffic, that can be duration weighted and reported as average audience. That is the first goal. The second goal of the project, and that actually encompasses a lot of steps that we've been proceeding down, but that's really the first goal. The second goal is really to establish engagement and view-through metrics that matter. So beyond counting, you have to make sure that the marketer community has metrics, a certain baseline of metrics that they can judge the effectiveness of their advertising. And then the third phase is to clean up advertising effectiveness measurement, because that's an area that is terrible right now. Advertising measurement effect, the measurement of the effectiveness of advertising, a lot of those processes really lack science, and they need to be cleaned up. So those three steps taken in sequence, and we've been proceeding along those paths, really, we think that will give the marketer community the tools they need to at least move the process forward. Unfortunately, it evolves slowly. There are a lot of battles along the way, but that's what we're trying to push forward.
So, quick question. So, let's talk about the one channel that we're not discussing. So we're discussing a lot of digital, and there's issues with fraud and viewability. What about TV? TV doesn't have issues with necessarily with fraud or viewability, right? I've never seen a commercial that's partially viewable. Everything's on my screen, and it's a big format. The issue with television has been over time is that you don't have measurement, not the granular measurement, not the granular campaign measurement. But voila, you now have the set-top box, which has second-by-second viewing, which is reinvigorating, right, the TV channel to some extent. Not in the same way, but from a measurement standpoint, you get a lot of detail. How accurate is this data?
There's a lot of issues with return path data, and the industry is really just scratching the surface on all of it. That's been kind of a big initiative of CIMMs, is to bring more of this into the market, but in the process to set standards, which George can talk about, set common cap and edit rules, and to make sure that it's representative nationally, because the big problem now, at least in the US, is we don't have representative samples of it into the marketplace. You have data owners who don't want to share their data. So it becomes kind of an issue as to how do you get a full picture across a market. And one last thing, just before George could talk a little bit more about it, is the ability of set-top box data to actually measure ads versus content is critical. And so that's why people want to bring more of it in, and the ability to match to third-party data sets. So there are a lot of advantages to it, and everyone wants to bring it into the ecosystem. It can enable so many things in terms of cross-platform measurement as well, but there are challenges.
So back to you, Scott. Back to the digital ecosystem. So there are a host of verification partners. Some are MRC accredited, some may not be. How does an advertiser choose, right? And what is the ROI, right? We're saying that a viewable impression can't obviously have, a non-viewable impression can't obviously have an impact on a consumer. That consumer may not transact, but do we know that? Is there an ROI to verifying a campaign? So with that, I'll maybe leave it to you to kind of go through your case study, unless you want to maybe comment right before that.
Yeah, well, excuse me, clearly there is an ROI, and some of it is depending on what kind of verification you're using. Ideally, your verification is proactive. You're solving a problem, not just finding out about the problem. But yeah, I mean, I'll talk about it in a minute, but I mean, let's face it, the industry has woken up to the fact that there's a lot of waste going on, and waste is not just non-viewable ads, it's putting ads in front of bots who aren't humans, and this has been going on for a while, and it's kind of the realization of, oh my God, we got to stop it. Again, as I said earlier, it's not that simple. We can prevent a lot of it, but ultimately, this whole industry is moving to programmatic at some point where machines are buying from machines, and it's all about the data, and it's all about understanding the data, and it's not a matter of black or white, it's a matter of how you leverage the data to do that. So, with that, yeah, perfect segue. Just hit this here. Yeah, so Integral, although we're known for, and a lot of those logos I've never seen before from some of those other players in the space, though we're known today for viewability and fraud and safety and quality, ultimately what drives the company, what we get most excited about is this vision that it doesn't matter what kind of advertising you're buying as a media, as a marketer, there's really three things you're striving to control, right? We all know this. It's the message, it's the person you're trying to target, and ultimately it's the place, the environment. Digital, for the first time, we have the ability as an industry to control all three of those at once and optimize all three of those at once. But sadly, so far as an industry, we really don't. We really have mimicked, for the most part, direct mail, direct response. And we focused on the person. And it makes sense because there's so much good data about a person that we've never had before in terms of you can look at sites they go to, products they're searching for, products they ultimately buy, even offline data now coming online that you can use to model behavior around and figure out who to target. The problem with that is our assumption is that it doesn't matter anymore where they see the ad, where you're buying the ad. All that matters is that you're reaching the right person. And from what we've seen is that big assumption has created all kinds of problems in this industry. The reason we have non-viewable ads is because we have attribution models that credit quantity over quality. So if you can buy cheap ads that aren't in view, you actually get more credit than buying ads that are in view. And publishers have picked up on that, and it's an incentive for them to put as many ads on a page as possible. So if I can illustrate this specifically around measurement, our measurement, again, is based on the person and the assumption that the exposure quality doesn't matter. It's all the same. Kind of like direct mail with a mailbox. Doesn't matter, all mailboxes are the same. And so I went to AT&T website recently. These are real screenshots. I got a cookie and I started to surf the web. And not surprisingly, I saw AT&T ads everywhere I went. Far left is a real site. I tried to find something that wasn't a safety issue, but a really bad quality site, and awful plastic surgery is about exactly what it's built to be, which is page after page of amateur bad plastic surgery. It's a train wreck, but as I went through page after page, about 80% of those ads were AT&T. Now in this case right here, they think they reached me 3 different times, by the way. Three different people, and it's really me, because they're using different vendors to target me. Here's an example, the second one of CBS News. We'd all agree that's a high-quality site. This ad, the front page is about 5 feet long, though, and there's lots of ads as you go down the page. This one happens to be right at the bottom, and AT&T's there. They also had a couple of placements above. And then finally, front and center with Time and Forbes. My point of this is, when they're measuring, we know intuitively when we look at this, that this media is worth a lot more. But when we're measuring this, chances are we're going to actually give most of the credit to awfulplasticsurgery.com because it had the most ads. And ultimately, we look at the timing of it. Oh, what was the last exposure? Oh, it was on awfulplasticsurgery.com, therefore it gets the credit. So that's not right. And it's, again, easy to understand why, because that data is hard. This exposure quality is a concept that's really hard to get our head around. And particularly as we move to programmatic, where you have machines buying from machines, like you need data that's granular, you need data that makes sense in this area. And as an industry, we don't have it yet, but certainly at Integral, our focus is on trying to unearth this and get it in people's hands so they can make decisions based on it. And I'm about to show you a product that we think is a big step forward in this area. So if you look at it, this is how typically people look at conversions, and they look at how to create ROI on a campaign. They basically take from a partner the total number of conversions, divide the cost by that, and ultimately you get the ROI. We know that there's a bunch of things wrong with that. As I mentioned, we're assuming all ads are seen. We're also assuming that all ads lead to a conversion, which we know is not the case. So what we've done at Integral is we've created this product called Causal Impact. And what it does is if someone's running us for viewability measurement or fraud or for safety, if they just put a pixel on a page that they're using as a success metric, so it could be a conversion page, that's the easiest, it could be a funnel page, just something that they're using already to create an ROI based on. Our technology will automatically bifurcate the campaign into a group of people who we know had no chance to see the ad. So the ad was never on screen. And another group of people who we know that the ad was on screen. And then the magic is our data science team has found a way to find statistical twins in each group to eliminate sample bias. And now we can compare the behavior of the statistical twins. Remember, one group was exposed, one group wasn't. And we look at the conversion rate or whatever we're measuring, and the difference between the exposed and the non-exposed, we now have created this new thing called a causal conversion. So it's based on causality, causal conversion. So in live data here, we start to look at it. Here's an example. I think this is an insurance campaign. And we see the way they typically measure it. And they look at the number of conversions by partner. But when we look at this with a new lens, the causal lens, we see that in the case of partner number one, despite 9,500 conversions coming from this partner, in the reality, only 1,900 were new conversions, or conversions we believe that was caused because of the media itself. The other ones would have happened anyway. So when you use this data, and you go through, and you start to look at the ROI calculations, in this particular case, again, real data, we see that this insurance company initially was thinking partner one was the way to go and spending a lot of money on this media. And in reality, they had a negative ROI for this media because, again, this partner was very good at getting credit for conversions that they did not create. Whether it be they have a lot of ads, cheaper impressions, or they're just really good at getting the last touch attribution down, this was clearly the case. So we're excited about this because, we're excited about this because ultimately we think that it's a new piece of data that starts to look at, did the media itself, did the exposure quality itself actually make a difference? And when you think of all of us, we all see, depending on research, somewhere between 500 to even 5,000 ads a day I've seen across all media in a day. How many do we actually remember? Whenever I ask people this question, people usually say like 3 or 4. Sometimes subconsciously it might be 10 or 15. The point is very few, very, very few. So it's not just about reaching that right person. Everyone's trying to reach that right person. It's finding that right environment where, whether it's the content itself it's related to, or the actual media itself they're comfortable with. Whatever it is, it's that magical moment of finding, and that's what we're trying to figure out, what it is. And the next step with this product is to be able to get more granular with the data and start to really understand what-if scenarios. So if I would change my media planning and put more with partner number one than number two, what would that look like, for example? And then finally, what I get most excited about is the concept is taking all the data from the conversions and going and figuring out, like, what are those actual ads that created that conversion? And then using that as a learning set, and our data science team is already working with us and creating machine learning models to figure out like what those ads all had in common, and now go start to look at other new ad placements and understand how likely they are to actually be able to drive some sort of influence. And so this will get to reach the right person, and then ultimately buy the right ad for that person that's going to actually perform. Thank you.
Great, excellent. So just to close this out, it sounds like viewable impressions or viewable ads are important from a measurement standpoint, because what you're really looking at is incremental ROI, not just ROI. So you want to make sure that you're actually adding value over and beyond what's being delivered. Any questions to the panel? So I'm just going to open it up, see if there's any specific questions around whether it's causal impact, attribution, MRC accreditation, sequencing of data.
Dave Smith from MediaSmith. I just want to point out that TV did have a viewability problem. There was technology implemented in the 80s by Glenn DeCraker and a couple of other companies that reported when commercials were cut short. And the stations had to pay so much money out that they implemented technology that caused it not to be a problem anymore, right? And I think the web can follow that. So I think it's very easy to say, well, television doesn't have that problem. They didn't have that problem because they fixed it.
Right. So the onus should be on the publishers on the digital side to start to course correct some of this stuff, so the industry as a whole can start to benefit from more realistic and verified kind of media procurement.
Yeah, I mean, the only comment I make on that is, like, television, we have only, hundreds of channels and hundreds of choices, and it's all regulated, and they're all big players for the most part. The web is completely different. We have millions of videos, homemade videos, professional videos, the whole array. Nothing's regulated. So I agree that it should be on the onus should be on the publisher, but it's not going to be, because it's just the nature of the web, and the fact that everyone's a publisher and everyone can be, and everything else.
Absolutely. Every single day, 100,000 different placements and sites are born. All right. One more question.
So I have a question about the audience validation. Let's assume you've implemented causal impact and you're able to really measure performance from a true ROI perspective. If that's the case, does audience validation matter? Like, does it matter that the person maybe you thought you were reaching a particular demographic or a psychographic, but you didn't, but that audience is still converting? So to what extent does audience validation need to be done in those sort of settings?
Well, just on that, I mean, what Causal does is we are isolating the exposure part, right? So the audience piece is only as good as your targeting. So it's not trying to answer that question, it's just trying to answer with that.
I was just using that as an example, as in you're doing good measurement, so where you're actually measuring performance, whether it's naively or causally. I'm just saying if you have an objective like a conversion rate that you're optimizing towards, again, does it matter, especially in the age of machine learning and algorithms building audiences, does it matter what they look like at the end of the day? Or if they can...
I think it does, because what these models do is they build patterns that you're going to draw inferences from and project to. So we see causal relationships between different consumers or consumers that have certain profiles or certain behaviors using these various tools, and then we communicate them, and then we create strategies to go out to the wider population and appeal to potential customers. Well, if that underlying data was misstated, and you thought people that had certain qualities, they really didn't possess those qualities, you've built an entire projection strategy on something that is inaccurate. Okay. So you're going to go out and implement a strategy which may be flawed. Now, I don't know. So the causal strategy that Integral just went over, I mean, all the devil is in the pairing of those two sets of cohorts. So Integral's data scientists that came up with that, that's where it lies. If those are good pairings and you can draw good scientific inferences between test and control, let's say, then you have, more validity to the strategy you set up. If those aren't good pairings, you might be making,
They're great pairings, by the way.
not a shot. All I'm doing is saying that's the dependency. But keep in mind that, you're drawing these inferences because you want to appeal to people that aren't generally current consumers, or you project those.
I think we're out of time. Good questions. Or one more? All right,
One more.
Oliver Getz, Mediacom. Which percentage of ad impressions sold programmatically have ad verification switched on? And if it's not 100%, why do you think people don't do it?
There isn't any stats to my knowledge that tells us that. My guess is, from what we heard anecdotally, about 40% right now of the time some sort of verification is being used. It's a good question. It should be on everything, but again, it's a cost, so it depends on how important it is for an advertiser.